Good morning, everybody. Um, so the name of this class is Rav Soloveitchik's Portrayal of the Avos. And before I start, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Yocheved Friedman, and I've been a teacher for many, many years. Right now, I'm a literacy coach in a school in Borough Park. I teach creative writing there, and I coach the teachers. Um, and a number of years ago, I went back to school and got a master's in Judaic studies, partially, as I'll explain in a minute or two, due to the inspiration of Rav Soloveitchik. And I actually wrote my thesis on Rav Soloveitchik on the Torah. So part of this class is going to be based on the research that I did for that paper. Okay, so I've been reading Rav Soloveitchik since I was 15. Really, it's because of my father, and I want to dedicate this shir and the rest of the series to the memory of my father, Harav Mordechai Chuna ben Yitzhak Halevi. I always thought of him as halachic man par excellence, ever since I read Halachic Man. And he loved the Rav's Torah, and in his last public uh, speech, he actually said over a Vart Torah thought from the Rav. So I think that it's very fitting that I dedicate this to him. Okay, so when I was 15, my father, who was a subscriber to JPS, got a copy of Halachic Man in the mail. And one Shabbos afternoon, I was very, very bored. So I decided to read it. Now, I have to admit that I didn't understand 50%. I mean, if anyone's ever tried to read that one, it's very philosophical, but there was just something about the underlying ideas and the language and the poetry in it that just grabbed me. So since then, I tried to read whatever came out of the Rav Soloveitchik's works in English. Not that much for a while, and then when the Torah Sarav Foundation started uh, transcribing and then publishing his recordings, there was more and more for me to listen to. Um, but when he really came to life for me was when I discovered his recordings. They're now, most of them are available on YU Torah. Back then, I was mailing away requests to Rabbi Milton Nordlich in Queens. Just curious, anybody know if he's still around? Anyone from Queens? Anybody? Okay, just
He was nifter about a year and a half ago.
really. Oh, Baruch Dynamis. Okay, I thought I met someone a few years ago who told me he was still there. Anyway, so he had this wonderful collection of cassettes. Um, so my first collection was actually the old-fashioned cassettes because I had an old car that only took a cassette. Okay, but since then, um, everyone's been able to access the Rav's Torah online. So once you hear him, it's just so much more powerful than reading him inside because not only do you have the ideas and the beautiful writing and the philosophy, but you also have his personal charisma coming across through his voice. And I'm just curious, anybody here who actually sat in one of the Rav's shiurim um, back in the day?
Yes,
Yeah.
once.
Okay, so I guess this will be a learning experience for all of us. And if there's anything anyone wants to add as I go along, that would I think would be very helpful.
He
Okay.
was my Rav in Maria.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay. So when I'm going to start off with after my introduction with a brief biography. So I'm going to touch on that. Okay, so I when Taras Harav Foundation started coming out with the Rav on Chumash, do you see this? Is this clear? No, I'm not sure why. Oh, I know, maybe because my
Now,
background is
now it is.
okay. When I hold it up in front of my face, you could see it, I guess.
No, that's blurry.
Okay, here we are. Abraham's journey.
Hold it back a little bit.
Hold it back. All right, you know what?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, fine. So this was, I think, one of the
Yeah.
first collections. Okay, one of the first collections of the Rav's Chumash drushes. And then they came out with another one a few years later, Vision and Leadership. We'll be looking inside both of them and many other books of his. So besides the Divrei Torah being brilliant expositions of the text, what struck me was that after reading them, I felt like whatever biblical heroes, whoever, whether it was the Avos or the Avos descendants, or were being portrayed, I felt like they were right in the room with me. The way the Rav described them, it felt like he actually knew them. So in the beginning, I thought, well, that's just due to the Rav's imagination, his creativity, his poetic way of expressing himself, which is all true. But then, as I learned more and more of his works, his philosophical works, his Hespedim, etc., I realized there was a lot more going on here, and it wasn't just dramatic portrayal, but it is a direct result of the way he views time, Masorah, the traditional community, and the covenantal community. And that is what I really want to develop in these series of classes. Okay, so before we actually look inside at some of these passages to explain what I mean, I just want to give you a brief summary of his life, because some of it actually will be very pertinent to the points that I want to bring out as the weeks go on. Okay, so just curious, anyone here ever read anything of the Rav inside? And anyone read any of his works?
Sure.
Yeah.
An essay? Okay.
Yes.
Right. Has anyone ever heard him speak recorded or record? I know live we have some people who were zoche to hear him live. I always say I was born 10 years too late. Okay. Anybody listen to his recordings?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have anyone who the Rav is new for them, that they really don't know much about him or his Torah or anything. Any newbies? Okay, so that means we all have strong schema, which will make our learning better. But hopefully,
I'm a
we'll-
newbie. Sorry, I'm a
Ah.
newbie.
Okay, great. Yeah, good to hear. Okay, so he was born in 1903 in a little town called Kaslavich in Russia. Might be part of Lithuania now at this point, into a very famous family, which is referred to as the Beis Harav, the Soloveitchik dynasty. And I am now going to share my screen. Okay, we're going to start off with some pictures as I discuss his life. Okay, can we all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So this is a photo of the Rav, probably in his late 50s or early 60s, where he was at the height of his powers. Okay, so his father was Rav Moshe Soloveitchik. Here we are. Okay, and his grandfather was Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. So these were Rav Chaim innovated a unique way of understanding the Talmud, the Gemara, an analytical method, which was referred to as lamdus in Hebrew. And he taught for a number of years in the Volozhin Yeshiva, where a lot of students absorbed this method. And then when he left Volozhin and went to Brisk, he had a small circle of students there, but a lot of them went on to be Rosh Yeshiva in various yeshivas throughout Europe, mostly Eastern Europe. So they too passed on this method. And I believe there are there are very few yeshivas today that do not employ his method of learning the Gemara. So just to give you a taste of the kind of lineage that the Rav was born into. So he learned primarily, really only when he was a child from his father, Rav Moshe. He never went to yeshiva, which is very interesting if you think about that. So they learned intensely one-on-one for many years. And that is where he got his knowledge and absorbed this methodology. He did spend time with his grandfather. How often did they actually sit down and learn together? I'm not sure, but his father was very proud to share little Rav Yocheved's Divrei Torah, his Chedushim, with Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim was very proud of him. Okay, this is a picture of Rav Soloveitchik's mother. I should have, just for those of you who are really newbies, his name was Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, also known as Yashaber or Beryl, as he was called in his family. Okay, so this was his mother. Pesha, her maiden name was Feinstein, also born to a rabbinic household, but the Feinsteins, her father was Rav Elia Prajana, had a little different outlook in their worldview and their hashkafa. So at the Feinstein table, besides Divrei Torah, it wouldn't be unusual for them to discuss current events, to talk about Tolstoy's latest novel. So she brought this element into her marriage, and she encouraged her children to read. When they moved to Warsaw, they had access to the library, and that, I think, she was a definite influence on the Rav. As we go further in his biography, we'll see how he kind of moved away from the Torah only approach. So to contrast this with his father's family, they were brilliant Talmudists, and everything was Torah. They really did not dabble in anything secular at all. In fact, they had a very negative attitude towards it. Just by the way, okay, maybe I'll just stop the share for a moment. Okay, so if any of you are interested in reading more about the Rav's life, there is a series of 2 volumes called The Rav by Rabbi Aaron Rakefet. And at first, when I saw it in the bookstore, I thought, great, wow, 2 volumes on the Rav's life. I can't wait to read it. But actually, the biography takes about 50 or 75 pages at the beginning of the first volume, and the rest of the volumes are really a treasure of the Rav's ideas, organized under topics. And what Rabbi Rakefet did was he must have sat for hours and hours listening to recordings and transcribing them. So you have word for word what the Rav said on different topics, YU, his family, Torah, etc., etc. Another book that would give you a lot of interesting information about his life, which is, I believe, no longer in print and very expensive online. I guess I'm lucky that I managed to buy it. I'm trying to see. Okay, The Soloveitchik Heritage, which was written by a daughter's memoir, written by the Rav's sister, Shalamis Soloveitchik Meiselman, and you'll get a lot of interesting information over there. Okay, so back to our share. Okay, so this is actually, this family tree is at the beginning of the Rav volume. So just to show you how the Rav is actually descended from Rav Chaim Volozhin, who was the Talmud Muvhak, or the most closest student of the Vilna Gaon. So Rav Chaim's daughter married Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, and then, as we've got Rav Yitzchak Zev, Rav Yashaber Soloveitchik. This is the Beis Halevi, whom the Rabbi Soloveitchik himself is named for, Rav Chaim, Rav Moshe, and the the subject of this lecture, Rav Yocheved Soloveitchik. Okay, now here is the Feinstein genealogy. So we see Rav Elia or Eliyahu Feinstein married Guta, and they had Pesha, who was the Rav's mother. And just parenthetically, you can see here how the Rav was a cousin to Rav Moshe Feinstein, because Rav Moshe Feinstein was a descendant of Rav Karelitz, who was the great-grandfather of Pesha. Okay. So the family after World War I moved to Warsaw in 1920. Rav Soloveitchik got a degree, a high school diploma from the gymnasium. Then he traveled to Germany in 1926 and got a doctorate in the University of Berlin on philosophy, the thought of Hermann Cohn. Now, needless to say, or maybe it's not that obvious, but obviously he went with the encouragement, the blessing of both his mother and his father. At this point, Rav Moshe was more open to general knowledge and engaging the world, probably due to the influence of his wife. He himself was teaching in the Tachkamoni High School in I believe it was in Warsaw, which was under the auspices of the Mizrachis. So already we see how this family is a little different than the rest of the Soloveitchiks. And there were many Rabbanim who couldn't understand why they sent their son to university. I'm just not going to get into all the interesting stories because that's not the point of this lecture, but you could read it in some of these biographies. Okay, so Rav Soloveitchik got married at this point. Oh, wait, 1 minute. He got his doctorate in 1926. Okay, I didn't give you the year. So that's on the thought of Hermann Cohn. He married Tanya Lewitt, who was from Vilna. He met her in Berlin, I believe, and she also had a PhD in education. We'll see that's going to be very important later on. And meanwhile, his parents had already moved to New York. His father was already teaching in Ritz, which was Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Theological Seminary, the yeshiva branch of Yeshiva College, as it was called then. So the Rav came to America in 1931, and his first post, he moved to Boston because he got the post of being chief rabbi there. And this is also important for my lecture. He faced a lot of resistance in the beginning in Boston. He was not welcomed with open arms. In fact, in 1941, he was accused of making money off the shechita, the slaughtering business, because one of his goals was to try to organize what was going on in the kosher butcher world, and he was trying to organize it and make sure that all the animals were there was a way to tell that all the animals were under the right hashgacha, and he was accused of actually making money off this by someone in the community. After a year or so, it was a very long, dragged out court case. He won the case, and the judge actually declared that it was total fabrication, and he was vindicated. But since then, it left a big mark on him, and he really tried not to get involved in this kind of thing. Instead, he put really most of his emphasis in his teaching. In 1937, he started Maimonides, which was the one of the first day schools, not the first, but one of the first day schools in the United States. And it started with 6 children. At some point, when the boiler broke down, they sat in his living room and learned. But eventually, he built up an entire elementary school and a high school. And I believe Maimonides is still a thriving school today. And what was unique about his school, and is still somewhat unique, even though many other schools have followed suit, is that he believed that girls had every right to just as good as education as the boys. So in 7th or 8th grade, when it was time for the boys to learn Gemara, the girls learned it too. They sat in the same class because he was afraid that if he separated the classes, the girls would just get a watered-down version of the Talmud. And this continued throughout high school. And this was a very new idea and made him the subject of a lot more controversy, teaching Gemara to girls, number one, teaching them together with the boys, number two. But he persevered, and I think I could say that because of his innovation in this way, there are many hundreds, probably thousands of girls, young women today who learn Talmud and use it. Some of the are I'd say halacha, etc. Okay. In 1939, what you may not know is he started the first kollel in America. It was called Heichel Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi. It was in Boston, named for his father, and he was the main Maggid Shir there. But it didn't last too long because a few years later, his father passed away suddenly in 1941, and he was eventually offered the post, which in YU. It was then called Yeshiva College, eventually turned into Yeshiva University, and he taught there for 44 years. There was controversy there too. For some reason, people were wary. They thought maybe it was just nepotism. But after his first year, hands down, no one had any issue. He just swept them away with the power of his genius. They say that the issues of the commentator that had some of the back and forth of why he should not be elected after his father were thrown into the Hudson River. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but it's just an interesting little anecdote over there. Okay, he taught for 44 years and was considered one of the foremost, if not the foremost Talmudic scholar in the world. He also taught philosophy at Revel, but that was just for a short time. He ordained over 2,000 rabbis who went in the New York area, but also across the country, and were in different synagogues. And you know what? Maybe I'll just stop the share for a minute while I just finish this bit up. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say that in this way, he affected orthodoxy tremendously in the United States, because in the 40s, the 50s, it looked like orthodoxy was going to die. In fact, there was an issue, I believe was it in Life magazine? One of the magazines that said orthodoxy is done for. But because all these Orthodox Rabbanim were being sent out to different cities and states across the United States, it really did a lot to bolster the Orthodox community. Okay, at a certain point after the war, the Rav officially became a member of the Mizrahi movement, and then was actually elected here as the religious leader, the rabbi of the movement here in America. It wasn't really as sudden as it seems. The Seth Farber came out with an article explaining how after somewhere in the late 30s, early 40s, the Rav was already speaking very positively about the Mizrahi. You have to understand what kind of family he came from. He came from a family that was very anti-Zionist, to put it mildly. Rav Chaim was really very upset about what was going on with the Zionist movement. So even though the Mizrahi was a religious arm of it, that was not acceptable. The Rav himself was officially probably a member of the Aguda when he came to this country. And in 1940, he gave a hesped for Rav Chaim Oizer at the Aguda convention, or whatever they called it in those days. But soon after that, he actually changed his allegiance. We'll talk about this in a few weeks when we analyze a piece that talks about these issues. But again, this was a source of great controversy, and many of the Rabbanim of the day who admired him for his Torah were really upset and did not see eye to eye with him on this. So in a way, he ended up being isolated from a lot of his peers. Okay, now for the general public, he gave the yahrzeit drashas once a year on the yahrzeit of his father on Gimel Shvat, and this attracted at first hundreds and then thousands of people crowded into Lamport Auditorium to hear him. These were tours de force, 4 to 5 hour speeches where no one moved a muscle but were just swept away by his brilliant oratory. Anybody here ever zocha to sit in a yard chair? Wow. Okay, so so I've listened to them in the original Yiddish. I thank my grandmother and my mother, who is listening now, for teaching me Yiddish. So I had to use the dictionary a lot because the Rav's Yiddish is beautiful, and he also throws in some Germanic words, which I had to then ask my mother, who grew up in Vienna and knows German, what those words meant. Okay, and then many people who listened to the Yardsatchirim went back to wherever they came from. People used to fly in and shared the Rav's Torah that way. So it was spread in that mode. He also gave a tshuva drasha once a year. I think it was officially for the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, of which he was elected as the chief Rav there to make halachic decisions. And this was, so the tshuva drashas were collected in a Hebrew, only in they've been written up in Hebrew officially. He himself, his son put it out, but he himself reviewed it. Shiurim Lezecher Avi Mori, Shiurim in the memory of my father, my teacher. And the tshuva drashas were collected in Al HaTshuva, written up by Pinchas Peli. They were also given in Yiddish. Pinchas Peli translated into Hebrew, and then it was also translated into English. In Maimonides' school, Matzah Shabbos in Boston, he used to give a shiur, I believe very often was on the Chumash. Anybody here ever attend any one of those Matzah Shabbos shiurim? People I heard used to drive in from Connecticut to catch those. Now we have someone here who was in Maria, right? So
Yeah.
Tuesday nights in Manhattan, he would give a shiur in Maria. I think it started off on Talmud, on Gemara. The last 10, 15 minutes were on Chumash, which will pertain to what I will be talking about. He published very little in his lifetime. Halachic Man, first in Hebrew, Ish Halacha, and then it was translated to English in 1983. That's when I got it. Kol Dodido Fake. In 1956, he gave a fiery speech at a Mizrahi convention in Yiddish, which was, and then it was translated into, he himself actually translated it into Hebrew. Since then, it's been translated into English. The Lonely Man of Faith was article in Tradition, and then eventually, I believe it was in the 60s, and then in the 1991 or 92, it came out as an English volume. You could buy it in your local Judaica store. Halachic Mind, which is more philosophical, was published, I believe, in the 80s, but he wrote it in the 40s. And and that was about it. Uvikashta Misham, another one of his major philosophical essays, was written up in Hebrew, I believe it was in the Talpiot magazine, and just recently was translated into English by the Torah Sarah Foundation. And so after teaching, writing, running Maimonides School, in 1984, he retired from the public eye because he became ill, and he died in 1993, Chol Moed Pesach, after this lengthy illness. Okay, so now we're going to start with the idea of this class.
Can I add something, please?
Yes.
Rav Soloveitchik was my Masada Kedushin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest influences in his life was his wife. She was my role model in life. So I think that's an extremely important part of his life. And she was a major influence. And when he died, it was like you watch the air go out of him. He just was a different man. He could barely function compared to what he was before.
Right.
So
Yes, I totally
think
agree. Yes, she was like a central part of his life. And I believe even though the Soloveitchiks, as a rule, never went to cemeteries, after his wife passed away, I believe he went every Friday. And he talks about in some of his tshuva drushes specifically how he wishes she were still alive so he could share his ideas with her. She basically ran Maimonides school because he wasn't there all the time. And yes, okay, so thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, so this class, we are going to talk about the Rav's typology because in order to understand how he portrays the Avos in such a personal and unique manner that they seem to be real as if he knew them, I first want to contrast that with the way he really starts off with Adam and Chava as more typologies, as types, not as he's not really talking about Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve as actual people. So let me share my screen again. Okay, so before we even get into typology, let's just take a little look into what the Rav has to say about studying the Chumash, studying the Bible in general. Okay, so this is taken from the Abraham's Journey book, which I showed you the cover a few minutes ago. And it's from an essay called Abraham as Personality and Paradigm. And actually, I'm just realizing now that even in that title, he's summing up a lot of what I want to say. Because on one hand, he views Abraham as a real personality. On the other hand, as a paradigm, as a symbol, as a type. Okay, but here in this section, let's see what the Rav has to say about studying the Bible. So, when we study the Bible, we must be concerned about two things. We must understand the semantics of the word, and we must understand the spiritual message of the Bible. So here we see how the Rav believes in zooming in onto every word, but also the underlying message. Then he talks a little bit about biblical criticism. That he says the problem with it is that it misses the entire spiritual message. The Bible is not just a book of stories, but a book of great spiritual message and a way of life. When they say see contradictions, I see harmony. I could give you a whole class on how the Rav viewed biblical criticism, but that's not the point, so I'm going to move on. Okay, now, besides understanding the semantics of the words, etc., there is a great spiritual message, a kerygma. The Torah is not concerned exclusively with past events. It is also concerned with our thoughts, our feelings, our commitments. It's not only chovas ha'evarim, those are the halachos of what we need to do, but also chovas halavavos, duties of the heart. And I'm going to move down here. Okay. In every parsha in the Torah, we can discover an article of faith, an ikar hayahadut, implicitly contained in it. If we examine the text closely, we may find a treasure hidden in one word or one letter. And this is certainly true of the first book of the Bible, Genesis, Bereshis. Human destiny is reflected there. Human triumph and defeat, human greatness and smallness, the potential of what man is capable of achieving, his opportunities, and even his defiance of the master of the universe. Okay, so that's a nice general introduction. Now, here is where we're getting to the heart of how he sees the Bible figures. When we speak about Abraham, we must always remember that the Bible is not only a book narrating events that transpired so many millennia ago. It speaks of events that are still taking place before our eyes. Actually, it is a book not only of Abraham, but also of the destiny of our people. We are an eternal people, and our destiny is eternal. And the Chumash is the book of our destiny. That is the Nachmanidean, meaning Ramban's concept of Masa Avos Siman Labanim. So here, in this paragraph, we see that the Rav really feels that these stories are happening before his eyes. And like I said before, I thought this was just a pretty turn of speech, but it actually is quite real, which we will learn how that could happen. Okay, now the next excerpt here, this is taken from a book called Family Redeemed. And, maybe I'll just stop the share for a minute just to show you the book. Okay, let's see. There we are. Okay. Family Redeemed, which was the first collection of essays put out, I believe, by the Torah Sarah Foundation. I think it was the first one. And there are various essays there, one on Adam and Chava. So since that pertains to our study of the Rav's Chumash interpretation, I want to show you what he says here. Okay, the purpose of this paper is to gain an insight into the nature and destiny of the woman and man whom God created in a specific way, and to begin to formulate on the basis of these insights a philosophy of man. Yet the frame of reference will be a spiritual one. Okay, I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. Okay, so what I want, let me see. Philosophy of man, sorry. Okay. What I want to achieve is an understanding on our part that the Bible is not just a book of the past. It is far more than that. It is a book of the present and future. In all times, in all periods, in crisis, as well as success, man may find his problems and anxieties defined in this book of books. So keep that in mind, because this is another layer which we'll get to more towards the end of the course, that not only were the Avos alive for the Rav, but he actually identified with them to the extent that he would find his own life within their lives. Okay. Then here he says how he decries how our approach to biblical interpretation is too often homiletical. It is the pulpit and the synagogue approach. It's just become a collection of sermons, popular maxims, and vulgar common sense. However, the most beautiful aspect of the Bible is its Weltanschauung, its worldview, its spiritual outlook upon both the world and man. And just scrolling down over here, this essay is an experiment in a metaphysical, that means like above the physical, beyond, and axiological, which means having to do with values, interpretive approach to scripture. And again, look what he says here, an exercise in detecting my own self in the scriptural portraiture of man, of finding my own acute problems and questions, my own torturing anxieties and fears, my own inspiring hopes and aspirations in the story of the biblical heroes. The detection of one's own self in biblical man is an exciting experience. It strengthens one's spirit and relieves him of his cares. It is a redemptive and enhancing awareness. Okay, so what we have learned so far is that the Rav believed in a close reading of the text, a treasure in every word and letter. He also believed there's a spiritual message to be found beyond the words, human destiny. And not only that, somehow these events are happening now. They're not ancient stories. And finally, that man can find his own problems and anxieties within the text and somehow be redeemed. Now, I just want to quote here from, I'll stop the share for a moment, from actually a Yiddish recording called Brisbane Hapsarim, which sadly is no longer available online, from 1955. And in there, he talks about when he first became a rabbi, the kind of speeches he used to give. So, when I first became a rabbi, I used to say, "Verwarfene drushes." Now, I understand Yiddish pretty well, but verwarfene was a little challenging for me. And I looked it up. I happen to have a Yiddish dictionary at home with 27,000 words. So it said overloaded. I don't know. Any Yiddish speakers here who want to maybe enlighten us on what the Rav meant exactly by verwarfene drushes? You kind of get the idea that, well,
I think it means worthless, like thrown away. You could throw them away.
Right. So that it depends on, is it verworfen or verwarfen? And unfortunately, I cannot listen to the recording. I have to reach out to Dr. Lustiger, who actually, Arnold Lustiger wrote the Masoras Harav Humashim. So I should have said that right away. That is an excellent resource if you want to read the Rav's thoughts on the Chumash. He has it written out as a commentary. And he also has many, many, many recordings of the Rav. He translates excerpts of Yiddish with English subtitles. I'll be sharing one or two as we
Please
go
say the
along.
word again. Can you please say the
Yes,
word again?
sure. Favorfener or favarfener? Drushes. Okay, let me continue with what he said. Maybe see the context really reveals what he wants to say. Then I realized I didn't need to do that. The Chumash, meaning that he didn't need to start looking all over the place and trying to figure out what to say in various texts, but the Chumash is the best sefer. But you have to know how to read between the lines. And then later on in the same drasha, he says, a sermon, a drasha, is always more effective if a parallel is brought from a Tanakh story. Then people's eyes light up and they can grasp a complex situation or a concept. To a Jew, the past is closer than the present. He feels closer to the Avos and to Yosef than to current events. So I thought this was remarkable that he tapped into this idea that at least ideally a Jew should feel that connection, that visceral connection with his forebears. Okay, I'm going to go back to share. Okay. This is taken from an essay called Sacred and Profane. It was based on a yard-side drasha the Rav gave, I believe, in 1945, called Kodesh V'chol, originally given in Yiddish. And then his son-in-law, Rav Lichtenstein, at a certain point, I think it was 10 or 15 years later, translated it beautifully into English. And today we're just going to look at one little bit. Later in the course, we're going to look at it more closely and it'll provide insight into how the Rav viewed time. So, but the Jew of the Masorah has a different conception of time. Revelation and tradition erase the bounds of time. Distance in time is non-existent for him. Thousands of years may have elapsed, but he walks back and forth from antiquity to modern times. The chief success of the old Cheder, although deficient in many respects, lay in the spirit of compenetration of a distant past and a dim future with an immediate present. So like I said, in a few weeks, we'll delve more deeply into time, but right now, this is really the paragraph I want you to hear. For Jewish boys and girls, Avraham is not a mythical figure, but an ever-present inspiration. They live through his tribulations and wanderings. They travel with him from Syria to Palestine. They feel the fear and trembling of Yitzchak on the Akedah. They escape with Yaakov to Haran. They are imprisoned with Yosef in the pit. They rejoice in his ascendancy to high office and fame. They lead the Jews with Moshe in the desert of Sinai. They sing with David. They are exalted with the prophets. They laugh with Rabbi Akiva. They meditate with the Rambam. These figures are not dead or historical have-beens for the children of the Cheder or the adults of the Halacha, but dynamic, living heroes who visit the Jew from time to time, bringing him comfort, inspiration, and hope. So we see from here how the Rav kind of brings the Avos, and not just the Avos. We also see he mentions the Yosef and the Nevi'im, and then Rabbi Akiva, and then Rambam. So going from antiquity to the Rishonim, that somehow they are right with us today. Okay, so I'm moving on to the typology section, so I'm just going to take a minute. Does anyone have any questions at this point? No? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I guess
yes.
to what extent is Maaseh Avot Siman Lavanim of Ramban influential on the Rav?
So that is an excellent question. He actually, in Abraham's journey, he has an entire essay on that. It doesn't quite parallel with what I am saying here, but he believed that in a nutshell, what he believed was that it's true that what happens to us we can see reflected in what the Avos did, but on the other hand, because the Rav was a big believer in autonomy and free will and creativity, he said we're not in lockstep with our forebears. We we see what they did, but we also are free to choose. We're influenced, but not totally. So if you want to read it in more depth, you could see the essay over there.
This makes him a Nachmanidean as much as a Maimonidean, doesn't it?
Yes, and in fact, I think it was Rabbi Genack, I'm not 100% sure, wrote an essay called Walking with Ramban about, or it may have been with Moshe Lichtenstein, because he used to learn Ramban with the Rav the summers that he came back to Boston. So there is an article called Walking with Ramban in a collection of essays that argues just this, that even though we always associate the Rav with Rambam, with Maimonides, he really had this powerful love for all of Ramban's work, and it did permeate a lot of his thought. Okay, so now let's go into typology. So the Rav is actually famous for this technique, starting with
Just a second.
Yes,
The
sure.
word that you said, one is in Yiddish, one is in German. It means the same.
Verwarfen?
Yes.
Okay, so
Verwerfen
what does it mean
meaning
in
to throw out, like
Okay.
something that's not important. But the other one is the same thing, is the same thing.
Aha. Okay, so I guess we could conclude that's
You
he
could
meant
also,
that
I've also heard the term Usgewarfen.
right. So
I've had
No, no,
I
no.
heard that in my house growing up.
right.
Or-
So
or
So that could be
Usgeworfen.
thrown out, and Verwarfen could be it's a lost cause. I'm not
right. So
sure.
I think there's a little bit of a difference between
Yeah.
actually, I don't think it literally meant thrown out, but that idea. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the Rav, starting in Halachic Man, used a technique called typology, which means he likes to present ideals, certain pure types of personalities, and he gives them names. The very first one is Halachic Man, but halachic man is really just a symbol, a paradigm for an ideal type. You're not really meant to take it literally that every man of halacha, every person who is immersed in God's Torah is going to have every single facet of what he portrays. But it's an ideal, it's something to aim for. It's kind of a more of a general picture. He also, before we read inside, I just want to share with you. So in the book Halachic Man, he brings other types: cognitive man, man of religion, lonely man of faith. He talks about Adam 1 and Adam 2. He also does this a lot in his Espedim. So he has Rosh Chodesh man, that was of gold. The brisker of his uncle, Rav Elvel Soloveitchik, I believe he called Ish Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippur man. Rav Chaim Heller was the man-child. So he uses this a lot. So it's important for us to understand what he's doing here. And then we're going to contrast it with what he does with the later Avos. But let's take a look at the first page of Halachic Man. So Halachic Man reflects two opposing selves. Two disparate images are embodied within his soul and spirit. So right away from the very first sentence in print, the Rav is being dialectical, meaning juxtaposing, putting side by side two conflicting ideas. On the one hand, he is as far removed from homo religiosus, which means in Latin, it just means religious man, but he likes to refer to him as homo religiosus, as east is from west, and is identical in many respects to prosaic cognitive man. Cognitive meaning a man of reason, man of intellect. So on one hand, just to paraphrase, a halachic man is more cognitive, more rational. On the other hand, he is a man of God, possessor of an ontological approach that is devoted to God and of a world view saturated with the radiance of the divine presence. Ontological, which, of course, stumped me when I read it. I had to look it up at one point. Means relating to the branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of being. So whenever we see the word ontological, the Rav is using it to explain the nature of being or existence. how his consciousness. For this reason, it is difficult to analyze halachic man's religious consciousness by applying the terms and traits that descriptive psychology and modern philosophy of religion have used to characterize the religious personality. So over here, he's saying that he's a very complex figure, and just using some psychology and even philosophy of religion is not going to reveal who halachic man is. I'm just going to skip down to here. So the next couple of paragraphs, he says that he does have a side that's rational, that wants to learn, wants to know. That's, the halachic side of him, trying to unravel the halachos of the Torah and the Talmud. But on the other hand, he also has a spiritual, almost mystical side to him, who doesn't want to know what's what, but he wants to know why, or who God is, get close to God. So in spite of this, he says halachic man is not some illegitimate, unstable hybrid, some mix, something that is strange. On the contrary, out of the contradictions and antinomies, which is just a fancy word of saying contradictions that are unresolvable, there emerges a radiant, holy personality whose soul has been purified in the furnace of struggle and opposition and redeemed in the fires of the torments of spiritual disharmony to a degree unmatched by the universal homo religiosus. So what he's saying here is that even though he does have these two sides to him, which seem very contradictory, somehow he comes out whole. He manages to unite his inner contradictions. The deep split of the soul prior to its being united may at times raise a man to a rank of perfection. So what he's saying here is actually that original split is a good thing. Having opposing forces, having this disharmony could actually be good, which for sheer brilliance and beauty is unequaled by any level attained by the simple whole personality, who has never been tried by the pangs of spiritual discord. So you don't have to agree with this, but this is what the Rav believed. And it permeates a lot of his thoughts, that actually it's a good thing to be divided. It's a good thing to have contradictions, to be struggling between different ideas and forces. It actually raises you to a higher level. In accordance with the suffering is the reward. Lefum tsara agra. So the more you suffer, the more we know this from Avos, that the harder it is for you to do a mitzvah or attain something important or holy, the higher the reward is that Hashem will give you. So in accordance with the reward and in accordance with the split, the union. I just love that sentence. I just have to share it with you. Okay, so basically, the greater the split, then the more beautiful the union. Okay, now, if you notice, the very first word, halachic man, has a little one. So if we go to the footnotes at the back of the book, we see a very important footnote where the Rav tells us he did not invent this idea of typology. He got it from somewhere. Obviously, the description of halachic man given here refers to a pure ideal type, as is the case with the other types with which the human sciences, okay, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, that's German, are concerned. Real halachic men, who are not simple but hybrid types, approximate to a lesser or greater degree the ideal halachic man, each in accordance with his spiritual image and stature. And then so here he's saying that don't think that everyone, every Talmud Chacham, great Torah scholar, is going to match exactly what he's telling you. This is just a type, a pure idealistic type. And he says here he gets it from Edward Spranger, who wrote a book called Laban's Form, and I'm not going to translate, I'm not going to read the rest, but it's translated as Types of Men. And he actually came up with 6 different types that of different types of personality types. He was more of a psychologist, and it sold 28,000 copies by the end of 1920. And if we do the math, that's when the Rav was heading towards Berlin and probably read this book. So that is where he got this idea. So what we understand from here is that halachic man is an idealized type, and in reality, each man of halacha just resembles him to a certain degree. Okay, I'm going to look at one more thing, and then I see we're almost out of time, and because I want to give a few minutes for questions at the end. Okay, so the next page is an excerpt from an article by Eugene Borowitz called The Typological Theology of Joseph B. Soloveitchik. And I'm sharing this with you because I think he really explains very clearly what the Rav is doing when he does typology. So let's skip down to the bottom. Rabbi Borowitz, I believe, was a rabbi or a former rabbi who taught a lot in ethics and philosophy and wrote a tremendous amount. And in this paper, was very early on in the Rav's career. He's analyzing the few essays that had come out, which was basically Halachic Man in Hebrew and Lonely Man of Faith. Yet these two threads are shaped and controlled by a third, which assigns them their weight and value. All of Soloveitchik's writing, as far as I can tell, takes place within a fundamental structure of typology. That is to say, he does not deal with things as they are, or even with abstractions from things as they are, but rather with pure possibilities of existence. These ideal forms are never found as such in our world, for all historic phenomena are necessarily imperfect manifestations of these ideal types, and often the intersection of several of them. So he's explaining how these are, I love that phrase, pure possibilities of existence. So these are possible, but do not match up to imperfect man. Now he explains why it's a good thing to use them. Nonetheless, the elucidation of such forms and their characteristics can help us understand the complex humanity which is ours and others, and can clarify our goals and values. So he believes, and I agree with him on this, that these typologies really illuminate the concept that the Rav is trying to explain to us in his various essays, hespedim, drashas, etc. So I'm going to stop here. So basically what we did was we read inside and we saw how the Rav viewed Chumash study in general as having a spiritual message, human destiny. We can relate to them, our own problems, we can connect. They are somehow present with us right now. Either we travel back to them or they come forward in time. We'll get to that when we discuss time. And then we looked at what it means when the Rav uses typology. We used halachic man as our first example. And next time I will start with showing you how when it came to Adam and Chava, the Rav also treated them as types, not as real human people. But starting from Avram and onwards, he begins to illuminate them and portray them as the human beings, real human beings. Okay. So anyone have any questions, comments?
Thank you. I can't even have any question. I'll just make one comment there. You're talking on the Ramban, right? So I'll just say when I was in Rav Lichtenstein shir, the one shir when I was in the Gris Kollel, so Rav Lichtenstein gave a shir 3 hours a week, and he spent the first hour on Ramban. He did a shir on Ramban on Chumash, and then he gave a 2-hour Gemara shir. And if you read Rav Sabato's book, that wonderful book, Seeking His Presence, Mivakshe Panacha, in Hebrew and English, Rav Sabato, the Rosh Yeshiva Malay Adumim, interviewed Rav Lichtenstein for over a course of, I think, about 20 weeks, a few years before he passed away. And it's a fascinating book. And that's I think it's there, but they asked Rav Lichtenstein if he was on a desert island, and you only take one book with him on the desert island, what it would be, the Ramban on Chumash. So, and the Rav Lichtenstein was just as much as a Maimonidean as his father-in-law, the Rav, was. So I just, to tie in what you were saying on the Rav and the Nachman, Ish, not Ramban, whatever, I just thought it's interesting on the Ramban. And Rav Lichtenstein clearly picked up on that, Maimonides and Nachmanides, even though they, as I when Jimmy Diamond, who's got his PhD on the Rambam, teaches here in Canada, professor in Canada. I remember he once spoke for us, and he said the Rambam, Maimonides and Nachmanides are like, the earth and the heaven, like they're so far apart on every major issue. The Ramban and the Ramban disagree about everything. Conception of God, mitzvah, everything they disagree. And I thought that's a little fascinating, but.
Right.
All
Oh,
right.
so that's reminding me, Rabbi Kelman, in a shir called Lech Lecha, which is available, I believe, on YU Torah. The Rav said he's going to go through this parsha with Ramban, and then, as an aside, he says that he prefers, in a way, Ramban to Rambam, at least the way they explicate Torah is Chumash, is because the Rambam was too steeped in philosophy, and he let that terminology sort of get in the way of what he was trying to do. It's kind of when you hear that, it's like, whoa, because, this is someone who has a PhD in philosophy himself. While he felt like the Ramban was not clouded, so to speak, with that, so he was able to get more to the heart of things.
Is he exhibiting perhaps the process of creative destruction, a Nietzschean process?
Okay, I'm not an expert on Nietzsche, but there has been an article or two and a whole book on the Rav and Nietzsche, so maybe you could look there, because I know there is definite connections between the Rav and Nietzschean philosophy.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Otherwise, just say thank you, and please got next week time at 9:30. I know it's not our usual, although I get my shirt at 9:30 in the morning, so I don't know what we're talking about. And today, of course, Rabbi Nati Helfgott will giving part 2. We just started last week on Sefer Yecheskel, so that's tonight at 8:30, and then tomorrow Parshat Shavua, and then my shir on Friday. And okay. Please invite a friend to join us. And
Right. Oh, I'm taking a peek at the chat. Rabbi Kelman, I see you shared Tova Lichtenstein's article about her mother. So if anybody wants to quickly
that's
click
a
on
great
that.
article. I
Right.
love that article. It's
Right.
so it makes the Rav. He was such a normal family. Like they did things that every family does. Go to the library, go to the like all the things. It's really a beautiful article. Tova Lichtenstein describing her mother. What Mrs. Soloveitchik. It's really. I would highly recommend reading it. But when you that's when I came to the shir, right? I started when we were talking about her a little bit, so I found that. Okay.
Right.
Oh,
Okay.
please post the article again. Okay, I'll do that right now. Right. If somebody came late, give me 1 second. I just have to copy and paste. I will do that. Message everybody. Okay, you got it. That's the article right there for anybody who missed it.
Oh, and thank you, Zev, for Varfin, meaning forgotten. So that also kind of fits in the context. Forgettable. Okay, thank you, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you, Emir Hashem, next Wednesday morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice meeting all the new faces, and goodbye to the regulars.